The morning sun filtered through the massive viewing ports of Kepler Station, casting long shadows across the polished floors of the Galactic Military Academy. Jake Morrison walked through the corridors with his datapad clutched in one hand, trying not to stare at the incredible variety of alien species around him. After 6 months at the Academy, he still felt like he was living in a dream. The Academy was huge, bigger than any city Jake had ever seen on Earth. Students from 17 different species attended classes here, learning everything from space navigation to advanced combat tactics. Jake was the only human in his year, which made him something of a curiosity to his classmates. He entered the Advanced Tactical Studies classroom and took his usual seat near the back. The room was designed to accommodate different body types, with adjustable desks and environmental controls for species that needed different air mixtures or temperatures. Jake always found it fascinating how the Academy managed to make everyone comfortable. His classmates were already gathering. Sektar the Krillian dominated one corner of the room. He stood nearly 8 feet tall, with a chitinous exoskeleton that gleamed like polished metal. His mandibles clicked constantly when he spoke, and his forearms moved with practiced precision. The Krillians were known throughout the galaxy as natural warriors, bred for combat over thousands of generations. Velnara slithered to her position near the center of the room. Her serpentine body was covered in scales that shifted color depending on her mood, currently a calm blue-green. The Cytherians were famous for their cunning and strategic thinking. They had never lost a war because they always found ways to outthink their enemies before the fighting even began. Thorek stomped to his seat, each footstep making the floor vibrate slightly. The Battleborn was built like a living tank, with thick armor plating that grew naturally from his skin. His people had conquered 12 star systems through sheer force and had never retreated from any battle. Thorek's species believed that showing weakness was worse than death. There were others too. Kixella, whose crystalline body could refract energy weapons, Bruntok, who could breathe poison gas, Yaldris, whose people could see in 17 different spectrums of light. Each species had evolved some incredible advantage that made them formidable in combat. And then there was Jake. Average height, average build, no natural weapons, no armor, no special abilities. His skin was soft, his bones were fragile compared to most species, and he couldn't even see properly in low light without artificial help. By any reasonable measure, humans were one of the weakest species in the galaxy. Professor Quindala entered the room, her ethereal form glowing softly. The Etherians were ancient beings of pure energy, who had achieved enlightenment thousands of years ago. They rarely involved themselves in galactic affairs, but they made excellent teachers because they could perceive things that physical beings missed. "Good morning, cadets," she said, her voice resonating directly in their minds rather than through sound. "Today we begin preparations for your final examination." The room fell silent. Everyone knew this day would come, but hearing it announced still sent a chill through the students. The final exam at the Galactic Military Academy was legendary. It was not just a test of knowledge, but a trial of survival. As you know, Professor Quindala continued, the final challenge is designed to test everything you have learned here. You will face a live combat simulation against real predators in controlled environments. This is not a game or a simulation. The dangers you will face are genuine, though we have safety measures in place. Sektar's mandibles clicked excitedly. Finally, a chance to prove our worth in real combat. "What kind of predators will we face?" asked Velnara, her scales shifting to an interested yellow. The professor's glow dimmed slightly. "Each of you will face a creature from your species' evolutionary past. Something that once hunted your ancestors. Something that shaped your people into what they are today." Thorek laughed, a sound like grinding stone. "My ancestors conquered every predator on our world. This will be easy. The tunnel rippers of Krilla Prime will be no match for a trained warrior," Sektar added, flexing all 4 of his arms. "Cytherians have always been too clever for mere beasts," Velnara said confidently. Jake remained quiet, taking notes on his datapad. He had learned early in his time at the Academy that it was better to listen than to boast. His classmates had incredible natural abilities, but they also had incredible egos to match. "And what about our human friend?" Sektar suddenly asked, his compound eyes focusing on Jake. What great predator could possibly threaten a species so soft and weak? The room fell quiet again, but this time the silence felt hostile. Jake could feel all eyes on him. This wasn't the first time his classmates had questioned what a human was doing at the academy. They had seen his test scores, which were average at best. They had watched him struggle with physical challenges that they completed easily. Many of them wondered why humans had been admitted to the galactic community at all. Jake looked up from his notes and met Zektar's gaze calmly. "I guess we'll find out," he said simply. This response seemed to amuse the Krillian. "Yes, I suppose we will. I hope they have medical facilities ready." Several other students chuckled at this. Jake just smiled and went back to his notes. Professor Quindala watched this exchange with interest. "The simulation will take place in 3 days," she announced. "Use this time to prepare. Study your species' history. Understand what you might face. Remember, these creatures were chosen because they represent the ultimate test for your particular evolutionary line." As the class ended and students began to file out, Jake gathered his things slowly. He could hear his classmates talking excitedly about the upcoming challenge, each one confident in their abilities. "The human won't last 5 minutes," he heard Thorax say to Zektar. "I give him 3, Zektar replied. "Maybe we should start planning his memorial service." Jake walked past them without comment, still wearing that same quiet smile. He had work to do. That evening, Jake sat in his small dormitory room surrounded by holographic displays showing Earth's prehistoric past. He studied images and data about creatures that had lived millions of years ago, things that had hunted his ancestors in the dark forests and open plains of ancient Earth. His classmates were probably studying too, learning about the predators they would face. But Jake suspected they were missing something important. They were preparing to fight monsters, but Jake was doing something different. He was remembering what it meant to be human. 3 days passed quickly at the academy. Jake spent most of his time in the library, researching and preparing. His classmates seemed less worried about studying and more excited about showing off their natural abilities. They talked loudly about their plans and strategies, confident that their evolutionary advantages would carry them through. The day of the final examination arrived gray and cold. The biodome facility was located in the lower levels of Kepler Station, far from the comfortable classrooms and dormitories. Jake followed his classmates through a series of secure corridors until they reached a massive chamber filled with monitoring equipment and observation screens. Professor Quindala was waiting for them, along with several other faculty members and medical staff. The presence of so many medical personnel made the reality of the situation clear. This was not going to be a gentle test. "Welcome to the Survival Challenge facility," the professor announced. "Each of you will enter a separate biodome that has been designed to replicate your ancestral environment. You will face one predator that has been selected specifically for your species." She gestured to a wall of screens that showed different environments. Jake could see dense forests, rocky canyons, underground tunnel systems, and what looked like an alien swamp covered in mist. "The challenge is simple," Professor Quindala continued. "Survive for 4 hours. You may use any tools or weapons you can find or create within your environment. You may not leave the biodome until the time limit expires or until you defeat your opponent." Zektar stepped forward eagerly. "What happens if we kill the predator early?" "Then you have demonstrated superior combat ability and will receive the highest marks," the professor replied. "However, I should warn you that these creatures have been chosen because they once represented existential threats to your species. Do not underestimate them." The first student to enter was Kixella, the crystalline being. Her biodome was filled with intense heat and molten rock, replicating the volcanic world where her people had evolved. Through the observation screen, Jake watched as something that looked like living lava emerged from a crack in the ground. The battle was spectacular, with energy beams and crystalline structures forming and shattering in rapid succession. Kixella won, but it took her nearly 3 hours and she emerged badly cracked and barely conscious. Next was Bruntalk, who faced something that looked like a massive insect with wings like razor blades. His poison gas abilities kept the creature at bay, but it was clear that the fight could go either way. He managed to outlast his opponent through careful positioning and patience. Zektar entered his dome with great confidence. The tunnel ripper waiting for him was everything the stories had described and more. It stood 12 feet tall with claws that could tear through solid rock and armor plating that deflected most attacks. But Zektar was a trained warrior from a warrior species. He used his 4 arms to maximum advantage, creating complex attack patterns that confused the beast. The fight was brutal and lasted over an hour, but Zektar emerged victorious, though heavily wounded. Velnara faced her challenge with typical Cytherian cunning. Her opponent was a phase spider that could shift between dimensions, making it nearly impossible to pin down. But Velnara used her intelligence to predict its movements and laid traps using materials from the environment. She didn't defeat the spider, but she survived the full 4 hours through clever positioning and strategic thinking. Thorek's battle was the most straightforward. His opponent was a stone mauler, a creature that was essentially a living boulder with teeth. It was pure strength against strength, armor against claws. Thorek's natural defenses proved superior, and he crushed his opponent after 2 hours of intense combat. Finally, it was Jake's turn. The other students gathered around the observation screens, curious to see what kind of predator could threaten a human. Even those who had just completed their own trials stayed to watch despite their injuries. Jake's biodome was different from the others. Instead of an alien landscape, it looked remarkably like Earth. There were trees that could have come from any forest on his home planet, grass that swayed in a gentle breeze, and a stream that bubbled peacefully through the center of the space. How peaceful, Velnara commented. Perhaps humans never faced real predators, but Professor Quindala's expression was serious. Do not be deceived by appearances, she warned. Jake entered the dome wearing simple clothing and carrying no weapons. The door sealed behind him with a soft hiss, and he found himself standing in what looked like a pleasant forest clearing. For several minutes, nothing happened. The other students began to whisper among themselves, wondering if there had been some mistake. Then the trees began to change. It was subtle at first. Shadows that didn't quite match the light, movement in the corner of vision that vanished when looked at directly. The peaceful forest suddenly felt different, as if something vast and hungry was watching from just beyond sight. Jake stood perfectly still in the center of the clearing, his head tilted slightly as if listening to something the others couldn't hear. His breathing was slow and steady, and his expression was calm but alert. "Where is his opponent?" Zektar asked impatiently. Professor Quindala checked her instruments. "It is there. The Void Stalker is one of the most dangerous predators ever to exist. It hunted early humans for millions of years during their darkest evolutionary period. But we cannot see it," Thorek protested. "That is what makes it so dangerous," the professor replied. "It exists partially outside normal space-time. It can phase in and out of reality at will, becoming essentially invisible and intangible when it chooses. It has perfect camouflage, enhanced senses, and killing instincts refined over eons of successful hunting." As if summoned by her words, something flickered at the edge of the clearing. For just a moment, the students could see the outline of something massive and predatory, before it vanished again. Jake turned slowly toward where the creature had appeared, but he didn't seem frightened. Instead, he began to move through the forest with careful, deliberate steps. He picked up a fallen branch and tested its weight, then discarded it for a better one. He gathered small stones and put them in his pockets. "What is he doing?" Velnara asked, her scales shifting to confused purple. "He appears to be preparing," Professor Quindala said, though she sounded uncertain. The Void Stalker flickered into visibility again, closer this time. It was enormous, standing nearly 9 feet tall when fully materialized. Its body was covered in dark scales that seemed to absorb light, and its eyes glowed with predatory intelligence. When it moved, it made no sound at all. Jake saw it this time and stopped walking. For a moment, human and predator stared at each other across the forest clearing. Then Jake did something that stunned everyone watching. He smiled. It wasn't a nervous smile or a frightened grimace. It was the calm, confident smile of someone who had just recognized an old friend. Then he turned and walked deeper into the forest, moving at a steady pace that was neither hurried nor slow. The Void Stalker followed, phasing in and out of visibility as it tracked its prey. "Why is he running?" Thorek asked. "Stand and fight like a warrior." But Professor Quindala was studying her instruments with growing fascination. "He is not running," she said quietly. "Look at his vital signs. His heart rate is steady, his breathing is controlled. He shows no signs of panic or fear. Then what is he doing?" Zektar demanded. The professor's glow brightened with sudden understanding. "Something that no other species in the galaxy has ever evolved to do," she whispered. "He is hunting." The first hour of Jake's trial passed in a way that none of the observers had expected. Instead of the quick, brutal combat they had witnessed with the other students, Jake's encounter with the Void Stalker had become something entirely different. It had become a hunt. Jake moved through the forest with a rhythm that seemed almost musical. He would walk for exactly 20 minutes, then stop and wait for 5 minutes, then continue in a slightly different direction. At first, this pattern seemed random to the watching students, but Professor Quindala's instruments told a different story. "He is tracking it," she announced to the confused observers. "Somehow he is following a creature that can phase out of reality." "That is impossible," Zektar protested. "The Void Stalker leaves no tracks, makes no sound, and has no scent when it phases." "And yet," the professor replied, pointing to her screens, "watch his movement pattern. He is not wandering aimlessly. He is following a specific path." The alien students watched in growing bewilderment as Jake demonstrated abilities they had never seen before. When he stopped at a tree, he would examine broken twigs and disturbed moss. He would kneel and study the ground where no footprints were visible. He would taste the air and seem to read information from it that their enhanced senses could not detect. "What is he doing now?" Velnara asked as Jake stopped beside the stream and began collecting smooth stones. Jake had found a fallen log and was using it as a workbench. With practiced movements, he began to fashion something from the stones and pieces of wood. His hands moved with a skill that spoke of generations of inherited knowledge. Muscle memory passed down through millions of years of evolution. "He is making tools," Professor Quindala said with wonder in her voice. "Primitive weapons." "Primitive?" Thorax scoffed. "Those are just rocks and sticks. What good are they against a Void Stalker?" They got their answer 20 minutes later when the Void Stalker materialized behind Jake as he worked. The creature moved with perfect silence, its claws extended for a killing strike. It should have been an easy kill. The human appeared completely unaware of its presence. But as the creature lunged forward, Jake spun around and hurled one of his carefully prepared stones with incredible accuracy. The stone struck the Void Stalker between its glowing eyes, causing it to stumble and phase out of reality in surprise and pain. "Impossible," Zektar whispered. "He could not have known it was there." "Could he?" Professor Quindala asked, studying her readings. "Look at his stress indicators during that encounter. His heart rate increased only slightly. His breathing remained controlled. He was not surprised by the attack. Jake had already returned to his work, crafting more projectiles and what appeared to be a simple spear from a straight branch. But something else was happening that the observers were only beginning to notice. The Void Stalker's behavior was changing. For the first time in its existence, the apex predator was experiencing something new. It was becoming afraid. The creature had spent millions of years as the ultimate hunter. It had perfected the art of invisible stalking, of striking without warning, of killing before its prey even knew it was in danger. But this strange soft creature was different. Somehow the human always seemed to know where it was. Jake continued his steady movement through the forest, but now his path began to show a clear purpose. He was herding the Void Stalker toward a specific area where the trees grew close together, and rocky outcroppings created natural barriers. "He is using the terrain," Professor Quindala observed. "He is limiting the creature's movement options." "But how can he know where it is?" Velnara asked, her scales now showing deep confusion. "We can barely see it even with our enhanced sensors." The answer came as Jake demonstrated another uniquely human ability. He began to throw stones not at where the Void Stalker was, but at where it would be. Each throw was precisely calculated to force the creature to move in a specific direction. When the creature tried to circle around behind him, it found itself facing a carefully placed barrier of sharp stones. When it attempted to attack from above, Jake's spear was already positioned to threaten its landing spot. The Void Stalker was being systematically outmaneuvered by what it had assumed was easy prey. "This is unprecedented," Professor Quindala announced. "In all recorded galactic history, no species has ever demonstrated this type of hunting behavior." "What type?" Thorak asked, though his voice lacked its usual confidence. "Persistence hunting," the professor replied. "The human is not trying to overpower the creature or outfight it. He is wearing it down psychologically. He is making it afraid." Indeed, the Void Stalker's behavior was becoming increasingly erratic. It would materialize to attack, only to find Jake had somehow anticipated its move. It would try to retreat, only to discover its escape routes blocked. Worst of all, no matter where it went or how long it stayed hidden, the human kept coming. Jake's movements had taken on an almost mechanical quality. Step, 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 pause, listen, throw stone, continue. He showed no signs of tiring, no indication that he would ever stop. His face remained calm and focused, as if this was simply a job that needed to be completed. The alien students watched in growing horror as they realized what they were seeing. The Voidstalker, terror of a dozen worlds, apex predator of the galaxy, was being hunted by something that looked utterly harmless. How long can he maintain this pace? Zektar asked quietly. Professor Quindala checked her instruments. His oxygen consumption is remarkably efficient. His muscle fatigue indicators are minimal. Based on these readings, he could continue this activity for many more hours without significant decline in performance. And the Voidstalker? Its stress indicators are off the scale. It has never encountered anything like this before. It does not understand what is happening. As if to prove her point, the Voidstalker suddenly materialized in the center of the clearing and let out a roar of frustration and fear. It was a sound that had once frozen the blood of early humans, a cry that had meant certain death in the dark forests of ancient Earth. Jake stopped walking and turned to face the creature directly. For the first time since entering the dome, he spoke. There you are, he said quietly, his voice carrying clearly to the observation room. I was wondering when you would stop running. The watching students felt a chill run through them. There was something in Jake's tone, something patient and inevitable and utterly without mercy. The Voidstalker backed away from him, and for the first time in millions of years of evolution, an apex predator experienced the primal terror of being prey. The observation room had fallen completely silent. Even the medical staff had stopped their preparations to watch the screens in fascination. What they were witnessing went against everything they thought they knew about predator and prey relationships. Professor Quindala stood before the main display screen, her ethereal form glowing brighter as her excitement grew. She had taught tactical studies for over 2 centuries, had observed thousands of species in combat, but she had never seen anything like this. Professor, Velnara said quietly, her voice uncertain, what exactly are we watching? The professor turned to face her students, many of whom were still recovering from their own trials. Despite their injuries and exhaustion, they were all transfixed by Jake's performance. You are witnessing something that has never before been documented in galactic history, she began. You are watching a persistence predator in action. A what? Thorak asked, his usual aggressive tone replaced by confusion. Every spacefaring species in our records evolved from one of 2 basic types, Professor Quindala explained. Either they were prey animals who developed intelligence and technology to escape their predators, or they were ambush predators who used stealth and sudden violence to hunt. She gestured to Zektar. The Krillians evolved from hive insects that were hunted by larger creatures. They developed their warrior culture and advanced weapons to defend themselves. She pointed to Velnara. The Cytherians evolved from creatures that were hunted by flying predators. They learned to use cunning and deception to survive. The Battleborn, she continued, looking at Thorak, evolved from prey animals on a world full of massive predators. They developed their armor and strength to fight back when cornered. But humans, she paused, studying the screen where Jake continued his methodical pursuit of the increasingly panicked Voidstalker. Humans evolved differently. How differently? Zektar asked, though his voice lacked its usual arrogance. Humans evolved as persistence hunters, the professor said. They were not the strongest or fastest predators on their world, so they developed a different strategy. They learned to hunt by never giving up. She activated a holographic display showing Earth's prehistoric landscapes. Millions of years ago, early humans learned to track wounded animals across vast distances. They would follow their prey for days or even weeks, never allowing it to rest, never allowing it to recover. Eventually, the prey animal would collapse from exhaustion and stress, and the humans would claim their kill. That is impossible, Thorak protested. No predator hunts that way. It is too inefficient. For most predators, yes, the professor agreed. But humans developed unique abilities that made this strategy work. Watch. She highlighted different aspects of Jake's performance on the screens. See how he reads the environment. Humans developed the ability to track prey using the smallest clues. A broken twig, disturbed earth, even changes in the scent of the air. They learned to predict where their prey would go and what it would do. But the Void Stalker leaves no physical traces, Velnara pointed out. Doesn't it? Professor Quindala asked. Jake is tracking something. He knows where the creature is going even when we cannot see it. Somehow he is reading signs that our instruments cannot detect. On the screen, Jake was demonstrating another uniquely human trait. As the Void Stalker tried to escape by phasing partially out of reality, Jake began throwing stones not at where the creature was, but at where it would have to appear. His accuracy was incredible, but more than that, his timing was perfect. Pattern recognition, the professor explained. Humans excel at finding patterns in seemingly random events. Jake has been studying the Void Stalker's behavior for over an hour. He has learned its habits, its preferences, its fears. He can predict its actions. And the throwing ability? Zektar asked, watching Jake nail another perfect shot with a stone. Humans are the most accurate throwers in known space, Professor Quindala said. Their entire body structure evolved to support this ability. Their shoulders, their eyes, their brains, everything works together to make them living artillery platforms. But there was something else happening that impressed the professor even more. Jake was not just hunting the Void Stalker as an individual. He was hunting it as if he had a team. Watch his positioning, she pointed out. See how he moves to cut off escape routes, how he coordinates multiple attacks from different angles. He is fighting as if he has pack members supporting him, even though he is alone. That makes no sense, Thoric said. It makes perfect sense for a species that evolved as cooperative hunters, the professor replied. Humans learn to hunt in groups with each member playing a specific role. Jake has internalized those tactics so completely that he can execute them even without a pack. The most disturbing aspect of the hunt was the psychological effect on the Void Stalker. The creature was clearly becoming more desperate as time passed. It had tried every strategy in its repertoire: stealth, direct attack, intimidation, retreat, and nothing worked. The human just kept coming. The Void Stalker is experiencing something completely outside its evolutionary experience, Professor Quindala explained. It has never been hunted before. It does not know how to respond to being prey. But surely it can simply kill the human, Velnara said. It is larger, stronger, has natural weapons. Size and strength are not everything, the professor replied. The human is not trying to overpower the creature. He is trying to break its will to fight. Indeed, Jake's strategy was becoming clear. He was not seeking a direct confrontation. Instead, he was systematically destroying the Void Stalker's confidence. Every failed attack, every blocked escape route, every perfectly predicted movement was teaching the creature that it was no longer the apex predator in this encounter. This is psychological warfare at its most basic level, Professor Quindala observed. The human is teaching the Void Stalker to be afraid of him. The alien students watched in growing amazement as Jake continued his relentless pursuit. His movements were economical and efficient, showing no signs of fatigue. His heart rate, displayed on the monitoring equipment, remained steady and controlled. Most unsettling of all, his expression remained calm and patient, as if he had all the time in the world. How long could he continue this? Zektar asked quietly. Professor Quindala checked her instruments. Based on his current rate of energy expenditure, he could maintain this level of activity for at least 12 more hours. Possibly longer. And the Void Stalker? Its stress levels are approaching critical thresholds. It is beginning to experience system failures due to prolonged terror. The room fell silent again as the implications sank in. They were watching a human literally hunt one of the galaxy's most dangerous predators to death, through nothing more than patient persistence and psychological pressure. Professor, Velnara said slowly, what does this mean for our understanding of human capabilities? The professor's glow dimmed as she considered the question. It means, she said finally, that we have been asking the wrong questions about humanity. We have been wondering why such a weak species was admitted to the galactic community. We should have been asking why the rest of the galaxy is not afraid of them. On the screen, Jake was closing in on his quarry, and the Void Stalker was running out of places to hide. The final confrontation came in a small clearing surrounded by dense trees and rocky outcroppings. Jake had spent the last hour systematically driving the Void Stalker toward this location, using the terrain to limit its options. The creature's attempts to escape had become increasingly frantic, and its phases in and out of reality were now happening in rapid, chaotic bursts. The alien students watched in tense silence as Jake entered the clearing. His movements were still calm and controlled, but there was something different now. something final. He carried his makeshift spear in one hand and had several throwing stones ready in the other. The Void Stalker materialized at the far edge of the clearing, its massive form heaving with exhaustion and stress. For the first time since the hunt began, it was fully visible and seemed unable to phase out. Its glowing eyes, once filled with predatory confidence, now darted frantically as it searched for escape routes that no longer existed. Jake stopped in the center of the clearing and faced the creature directly. The distance between them was perhaps 30 feet, close enough for the Void Stalker to cover in a single leap, but far enough for Jake to react if it tried. "Nowhere left to run," Jake said quietly, his voice carrying clearly in the still air. The Void Stalker let out a sound that none of the observers had heard before. It was not the confident roar of a predator, but something else entirely, something that sounded almost like a whimper. "It is afraid," Professor Quindala whispered, checking her instruments. "Its fear responses are completely overwhelming its predatory instincts." For several long moments, human and creature stared at each other across the clearing. The Void Stalker's body trembled with exhaustion and terror. It had spent its entire existence as the thing that others feared, and it had no framework for understanding its current situation. Then Jake did something that would be remembered and discussed at the Academy for generations to come. He smiled. It was not a cruel smile or a mocking expression. It was something far more unsettling, the calm, satisfied smile of a job well done, the smile of a predator who had successfully cornered its prey and could now afford to be patient. "Professor," Zektar said, his voice barely above a whisper. "What is he going to do?" "I do not know," she replied. And for the first time since the trial began, she sounded uncertain. Jake took a step forward and the Void Stalker immediately backed away. Another step, and the creature retreated further until its back was against the rocky wall of the clearing. It was trapped and it knew it, but instead of attacking, Jake stopped walking. He stood there, spear ready but not threatening, and simply watched the creature cower before him. He could kill it now. Thoric observed. "Why does he hesitate?" "He is not hesitating," Professor Quindala said, sudden understanding filling her voice. "He is demonstrating dominance." And then Jake spoke, his words cutting through the tense silence of the clearing. "You spent millions of years hunting my ancestors," he said to the terrified creature. "You made them afraid of the dark, afraid of the forests, afraid to sleep. You shaped everything they became." He took another small step forward, and the Void Stalker pressed itself against the rock wall, as if trying to disappear into it. "But they learned," Jake continued. "They learned to make tools, to work together, to never give up. They learned to track you, to predict you, to outlast you, and eventually they learned to hunt you." The creature made another whimpering sound, all traces of its former majesty gone. "You made us what we are," Jake said, his voice carrying an odd note of gratitude. "You taught us to be persistent, to be patient, to never stop coming. And now we are the best hunters in the galaxy because of you." He raised his spear, and the Void Stalker closed its eyes, waiting for the killing blow, but it never came. Instead, Jake slowly lowered his weapon and extended his empty hand toward the creature, not to strike, but in a gesture that was somehow both merciful and terrifyingly dominant. "Thank you," he said simply. The simulation timer chose that moment to reach 0, and the biodome's exit door slid open with a soft chime. Jake turned and walked toward it without looking back, leaving the Void Stalker huddled against the rock wall. The observation room was completely silent as Jake emerged from the dome. He looked tired but satisfied, like someone who had completed a difficult but necessary task. When he saw his classmates staring at him, he gave them the same quiet smile he had worn throughout his time at the academy. "How was it?" he asked casually, as if he had just returned from a routine training exercise. Zektar was the first to find his voice. "What are you?" he asked in a whisper. Jake considered the question for a moment, then gave an answer that would become legendary throughout the MIME Academy. "We are the species that looked at a world full of things trying to kill us and decided we were hungrier than they were dangerous," he said. Professor Quindala stepped forward, her ethereal form glowing brighter than anyone had ever seen it. "Jake Morrison," she announced formally, "you have achieved the highest score in the history of this examination." "Thank you, Professor," Jake replied politely. "Does this mean I passed the class?" The question broke the tension. and several students began to laugh, though there was a nervous edge to the sound. In the weeks that followed, word of Jake's trial spread throughout the academy and beyond. The video recordings were studied by military strategists across the galaxy. Human applicants to the academy increased dramatically, and several governments began requesting human advisors for their special operations divisions. Jake himself was fast-tracked to the Galactic Defense Force's newly created Human Integration Program. Within a year, human persistence teams were being deployed to deal with threats that conventional forces could not handle. Pirates who thought they could hide in asteroid fields found themselves being hunted for months by humans who never gave up. Terrorists who relied on fear and intimidation discovered that humans were very difficult to intimidate. But perhaps the most significant change was in how other species viewed humanity. The jokes about soft pink mammals stopped completely. When humans spoke in galactic councils, others listened carefully. When human ships appeared in contested space, conflicts had a tendency to resolve themselves quickly. Jake graduated at the top of his class and was offered positions with a dozen different military organizations. He chose to return to Earth to help train the next generation of human persistence hunters. On his final day at the academy, Sektar approached him privately. "I owe you an apology," the Krillian said formally. "I underestimated your species." "No harm done," Jake replied with his characteristic smile. "Everyone makes mistakes. May I ask you something?" Sektar said. "During the trial you could have killed the Void Stalker at any time in the final hour. Why did you show mercy?" Jake thought about this for a moment. "Because," he said finally, "the point was never to kill it. The point was to teach it that we were not prey anymore. Sometimes the most important victories are the ones where nobody has to die." As Jake's transport prepared to leave for Earth, he stood at the observation deck watching the stars. Professor Quindala joined him there. "Any regrets about leaving?" she asked. "None," Jake said. "I learned what I came here to learn." "And what was that?" Jake smiled one last time. "That the galaxy is full of amazing species with incredible abilities. But sometimes the most dangerous predator is the one that does not look like a predator at all." The transport engaged its engines and began the long journey home, carrying with it a young man who had reminded the galaxy why humans had earned their place among the stars. Behind him, the Academy continued its work of training the next generation of galactic defenders, but now they had new courses in their curriculum. Courses on persistence hunting, psychological warfare, and the unique tactical advantages of the species that had once been prey, but had learned to become the ultimate predators. The galaxy was a different place now, and everyone knew it. The humans had not just arrived. They had announced their presence in a way that would never be forgotten.